Hey there, it's me, Joel. Welcome back to the podcast that keeps you informed, engaged, and connected to everything happening in the 905 region. Before we dive into today's episode, we want to take a moment to say a huge thank you to our supporters. Yes, that's you, who chip in $5 a month to help keep the 905er podcast going. Your support means we can keep bringing you the in-depth discussions, local analysis, and interviews that matter. Plus, as a supporter, you get access to exclusive bonus content like 905er Extra Minutes, where we go beyond the main episode with additional insights, behind-the-scenes conversations, and extended interviews you won't hear anywhere else. If you're already a supporter, we can't thank you enough. You are the reason we can keep doing this week after week. And if you haven't joined yet, now is the time. It's super easy. Just head over to 905er.ca and click on the supporter tab. For just $5 a month, you get more content, more access, and the satisfaction of knowing you're helping independent media thrive in the 905. So don't wait. Join our community of supporters today. Now let's get on to this week's episode. Hi, I am Joel McLeod, and welcome to the 905. If you live in the 905 region, then you are well aware of the epidemic of auto thefts in the region. It is common now to see doorbell camera footage showing young thieves in the middle of the night, or sometimes in the light of day, stealing cars out of driveways. Stories abound of families going to malls or shopping plazas for errands, only to be carjacked in broad daylight. These stolen cars are often driven along the 401 to the Port of Montreal, where they are loaded onto shipping containers and sent around the world. Organized crime has turned auto theft into a booming business in the 905. What's to be done about this? Well, we've been asking this for some time now. This episode is something we've been wanting to do for a long time. And recently, the opportunity to put this on the front burner again has come up. On February 26th, the Halton Police Twitter account posted a statement from Chief Steve Tanner regarding a recent arrest in Oakville of two men in their early 20s who were out on bail in the Montreal area on charges relating to auto theft. The police were caught by Halton officers with suspicious equipment used in the crime of stealing cars and were in fact in the process of doing that exact act. What caught our eye, though, was a statement by Chief Tanner calling on the federal government to do more to deter auto theft rings in Canada, to make the crime less lucrative for these criminal organizations. We wanted to talk with him about what he meant specifically in terms of actions to take and what needs to be done to ensure that the property and security of lawful citizens is protected in not just the 905, but the entire country. Have a listen. Thank you to Halton Police Chief Steve Tanner for coming onto the 905 to talk about an issue that I've been wanting to talk about for some time now, and that is the epidemic of auto thefts in the not just the 905, but let's be honest, across the country. Chief Tanner, thank you very much for taking the time from your schedule to come on today.
Well, you're welcome. And you know what? It's such an important topic. It's just glad to be here. Wish it wasn't for this reason, but it is still going on. That's for sure.
It is what it is, and we're not going to shy away from it. The reason why specifically I wanted you on was on February 26th, the Halton Police shared a statement from you, and at that time, just to give our listeners a bit of background, there was an arrest of two young men from Quebec, the Montreal area, who were linked with auto thefts. Halton police officers determined that they were in the process of stealing a car in Oakville. The officers had arrested them, and they had determined that they had been out on bail from Montreal. They were arrested there. They were out on bail. They've come here to steal cars again. In that statement, you had mentioned or stated explicitly that the federal government needed to bring in stricter measures to tackle auto theft. And I'm just asking you, what specifically were you thinking of when you made that statement?
Yeah, we talk a lot about what our justice system needs to do. Where's the deterrent in all of this? because unfortunately, much like shoplifting, auto theft is seen as a theft
Mhm.
occurrence. You know what? Somebody steals a car in the middle of the night. Sometimes nobody gets hurt, but more often lately somebody does get hurt, or definitely, we're having home invasions and all sorts of different types of auto theft. So I think it's been seen as just a theft for too long. People are in and out of custody, and it is so lucrative and continues to be so lucrative that the drawback to do it again is there because the risk, the benefits that these people think that they can make
Mhm.
financially or otherwise from the crime outweighs the deterrent. So it's a combination of needing some stricter sentences, and that's not for the first time offender 15-year-old that jumps in a car that's someone's left with the engine running at 7-Eleven. We're talking about organized crime groups that are making millions of dollars, and then
Right.
that money goes back to fuel other crimes, whether it's drug importation, exportation, firearms, illegal firearms. So it's really trying to get at the organized crime part of this. And when you see the criminals coming from Montreal, there's a definite nexus to the Port of Montreal,
Mhm.
which has been for some time now the major export site, we believe, for stolen autos going overseas for huge cost benefits for the organized criminals.
You know, I think it would help our listeners if you could just explain how these organizations work. Because I think when you see the doorbell cameras, people post them online like, "Hey, my car was stolen," and it's always some young 20-something teenage kid who is probably going to get off on a young offenders rap or is a first time offender. And I'm wondering, could you just give us a bit of explanation of just what exactly how do these organizations work and why are they recruiting like these younger people with clean records essentially to do this?
Yeah, and I think to start that, it really is important to sort of paint the picture of how prevalent this is. So
Hmm.
in 2023, in Halton region, we had 1,500 cars stolen. That's approaching 4 to 5 cars per day. That sort of volume of cars does just not disappear unless there's a huge organization behind that, getting the cars into containers, getting them shipped to Montreal, getting them put onto ships overseas, having the buyers overseas ready to pay cash for all these vehicles. And you've seen some of the exposés on different news channels on that. So yeah, there's a network there where what we're seeing is when we arrest people in stolen vehicles or attempting to steal vehicles or doing home invasions, there's a mix of very young people who are recruited just for the purpose of stealing the vehicle. And I'm sure they know, and they would, or they're told that if they do get caught, penalty is going to be relatively low. Here's two, three, $4,000 to do this, 1 hour or 2 hours work.
Hmm.
Take a little bit of risk. Don't worry about stopping for the police if they do come, because if you drive as fast as you can and as recklessly as you can, you may well get away with it anyway. So that it just leads me to my next concern, which is citizens, safety and our officer safety,
Right.
because our police vehicles are continually being rammed by people in stolen cars. So they can recruit the young people, pay them a couple of $1,000s to steal the car. They ultimately end up with a vehicle that really is worth probably more than 100,000. Even if they get 60 or $70,000 cash, there's no investment. So it's basically sheer profit. So it really is, organized crime is driven by revenue, driven by profit. And as long as that profit's there, and as long as there still is the ability to export vehicles at huge benefit, then the crime is going to continue. So we see a mixture of very young 16, 18-year-olds. And we also see 30, 35, 40-year
Hmm.
olds, whether they're from Montreal or, the GTA area. Quite often, organized groups are from Montreal. I will say just in the last 2 weeks or so, just locally here in Halton, we concluded a project into an organized auto theft group. 4 different individuals were arrested. They were all from Montreal, suspected of probably stealing 75 vehicles over a 4 to 6 week timeframe, and a number of those vehicles were recovered. So yeah, there are definitely some trends there, and unfortunately we're still recovering vehicles at the Port of Montreal, which means vehicles are still getting through just because of the sheer volume there.
So the deterrence that you're talking about, and I'm going to throw fellow police chiefs across Peel and Toronto, and let's throw in Montreal as well for that fact, because I don't think they're isolated either. The deterrence that you're talking about, because the profit margin is so high. Somebody goes and steals a car. They, as you just said, they sell it for pure profit. There's no financial investment. It's just, can I get away with it? And as long as they keep getting away with it, they make money. So I'm wondering, what exactly is the deterrent to stop them from stealing an SUV or a car from we can't, do we just fine them, or is it just stricter criminal punishments, longer time in jail, or I'm just trying to get my head around that.
Yeah, I mean, on the criminal deterrent side, there has to be harsher and stricter penalties. People need to be kept in custody more often, especially when it's not their first offense.
Hmm.
I mean, I get the reality of first offenders, whether they're young or not. Most people are going to get out of custody if it's a first offense. But we got people that it's their second or third offense and they're still getting out. So it's a larger problem perhaps too, because a lot of our correctional facilities are full or full or close to full. So there's a balance there that have to be, a very considerable investment by the provincial government into provincial institutions, or the federal government if it comes to sentences of 2 years plus a day. But what really backs up the correctional facilities are when an individual is taken into custody, whether it's for auto theft or something else, and they're held in jail, they're held in provincial institutions until after they're convicted. And only if they get a sentence of greater than 2 years do they go to the federal institution. So the provincial facilities, like a very large one here in Maplehurst, I think holds up to around 1,500 prisoners, maybe full. So it's a system that's at that brink of not being able to manage the what we need it to do, or there's some less violent, less dangerous prisoners who are in custody that we're going to have to look at a different way of dealing with some of those.
I want to put a pin in that statement, and we're going to definitely come back to that. But there's another point that I want to talk about, and the fact is, the two gentlemen that you made a statement about originally were in Montreal, in Quebec. Um, that is far far outside your jurisdiction, and one thing I'd never hear about this is the RCMP talking about this at the clearly an organized crime level. I'm a layman. My take is there's clearly some kind of interprovincial organized crime group that to link up from cars from Peel, Halton region, driven along the 401 to the Port of Montreal, put on the shipping containers and shipped overseas. As you just said, clearly that is an interprovincial jurisdiction. Yet it seems that the onus to break this thing up is on you, Peel region, Toronto police. Is there a federal component here that we're not hearing about? Is there an RCMP level investigation? Are you able to talk about that? I'm all I hear is about from you and your kind of on the ground colleagues.
Yeah, we really are multi-layered when it comes to law enforcement in Canada. So we have large municipal services, and around the GTA, we tend to be large, which is more than 1,000 members to 4 or 5,000 in Toronto. Those large services, we do a very good job of working together. We have joint force operations or investigations where we have officers from the different services working together jointly. Sometimes, and in Ontario, with the Ontario Provincial Police, are heavily involved in auto theft. The provincial government has invested heavily in funding for auto theft programs and projects. So we have the support of the provincial government when it comes to enforcement, and we have that integrated approach with the Ontario Provincial Police and the municipal services. We also have very good uh, liaising and working with police in Quebec, whether it's Montreal City Police or the Sécurité de Quebec. It used to be the QPP.
Mhm.
So their provincial identical service to the OPP, heavily invested in auto theft. The RCMP are a little bit different at the federal level, and I think it's not just the RCMP. Where some of it has fallen down over the past couple of years, and it may be getting a little bit better, is the ports are governed by CBSA. So the Canadian Border Security people are responsible for the Port of Montreal.
Mhm.
But CBSA typically concentrates on what's coming into the country. So, of course, they're at all our land borders and they're checking for drugs and firearms at those land borders. They don't have and don't appear to have the resources or the funding to be able to put enough either people or high-tech equipment, X-ray types of machines at a place the size of the Port of Montreal, because it's enormous. There are thousands of shipping containers. So it's a volume problem that they cannot check all of those containers. I and many other police leaders and politicians at different levels have been saying CBSA ought to have systems in place there where every truck that drives in with a large cargo container, just x-ray it. And if there's one or two vehicles in it, check them.
Mhm.
And oversimplifying it, perhaps. But if we could do that, that would stop the exportation. Now that would drive it to Halifax or Vancouver, and we'd have to do it at all those different places. But that's where the solution needs to come. And you've seen probably, and certainly our citizens have heard more in recent months since the issues with the Trump administration and tariffs and
Right.
what's happening at the borders, that the RCMP are taking a much more active role in assisting at the borders. I don't believe they're involved heavily at locations such as the Port of Montreal, but that's one area where if CBSA can't do it, maybe the RCMP should be because it's a federal port.
Right.
There also used to be, it's complicated, a long time ago, there was a separate port police. Delta BC is a large port, and they used to have their own police service that looked after the port in British Columbia. And maybe we need to get back to that. If
It's
CBSA can't do it,
it just sounds to me like there's a lot of layers and you're all kind of left on your own to kind of coordinate, who, as you said, yeah, if we clamp down on the Port of Montreal as the exit point for these vehicles, yeah, it's just another half day's trip down to Halifax to
right.
that port. And then do we just go call the Nova Scotia Halifax PD to deal with that? Is it would I guess at the federal level, aside from stricter measures, should we be looking at some kind of national task force to kind of coordinate all these efforts to hear, so that you and your colleagues here in Ontario and in Quebec are able to better coordinate, speed up response times, or to get ahead of these criminal organizations, which seem to be kind of exploiting a bit of a Swiss cheese approach. Part of my euphemism there, just better resources, better communication to get ahead of this.
Yeah, I mean, there really is, in fairness, there is good coordination and communication between the various levels, including members of the RCMP who are very well intentioned and doing what they can, but they've got so many
Right.
duties and they're split in so many different directions. Probably more than half or two-thirds of the RCMP in Canada are policing municipalities in other provinces other than Ontario and Quebec. And I think the combination, I think the answer for the ports and for the exports and to a degree the importing of illegal firearms and otherwise is to have sort of that combined CBSA RCMP federal approach because these ports are federal property. So there are some jurisdictional issues there. Even if our officers and Ontario provincial police officers and City of Montreal officers are at the Port of Montreal, we need some assistance of the CBSA because they have jurisdiction on that property. So there's some legal things that could probably be looked at. Um, but I think those ports definitely are a federal responsibility, no matter who looks after it. RCMP, CBSA, start up a new port police again if it has to be something separate. But it has to be ongoing and committed to make sure that we stop both the import and the export. And as I said, in absolutely enormous facilities. So it's not simple, but it takes considerable resourcing.
I want to come back to the pin I mentioned earlier, and that's focusing here in Ontario. I find this aspect a bit parallel to the auto theft story. Is that I keep hearing news reports that here in Ontario, cases are being dismissed because courts are so backlogged due to a lack of funding that the accused are being basically saying their charter rights are being violated to a speedy, timely trial, and they're being dismissed. And I'm wondering, does that have any bearing on being able to provide a proper deterrent? Because if you're a young kid and I'm being told, if I'm the guy trying to recruit you into this criminal enterprise, say, yeah, you might get arrested, but chances are you just hang out in a jail for a year or two. You might not even see court. You'll be back out, and I'll give you back. I'll get you back into the routine. So, I'm wondering from your perspective, what's that play into, again, providing a proper deterrent, proper message that if you're caught, you're gonna pay the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely, in a very negative way, layers onto the issue. There's a court ruling that basically says in Canada, if you're charged with something within 12 months of you being charged, if you have not had your trial date yet, a judge is likely to throw that out. If it's going to be a judge and jury trial, which are more like a first degree murder type of thing, that 12 months may become 18 months. But there's very tight timelines where it's not always the police not being able to meet those deadlines. We're short of Crown attorneys, and it's hard, I think, to recruit young lawyers to be Crown attorneys because of sometimes the lure of money and large corporate firms and other sorts of legal work. So they're limited in who they can attract, but then in what their funding allows them to hire. And then there's a whole bunch of different, not just Crown attorneys, but resources that we need to put Crown briefs together and for those Crown attorneys to go over those Crown briefs and put them all in order for court and do all that in every case in less than 12 months. So it definitely is. If I was a criminal, I would definitely think, you know what, even if I do get caught, there's a chance that this is just going to get thrown out for no other reason other than, a court a while back thought that 12 months was long enough for any trial to happen. The reality is the justice system is not robust enough to have all of those cases within 12 months. Sometimes there's not courtrooms available, or there aren't enough judges to hear those trials, or there's, it's or not enough Crown attorneys to prosecute them. So it's definitely that is more of a provincial investment where our Crown attorneys, our criminal Crown attorneys in Ontario and our provincial courts are provincially funded. So our province in Ontario have invested heavily in police investigations. I think we need to up that a little bit on the Attorney General justice side.
Fair enough. One kind of last issue or question I have on the auto theft part. The way that these criminals are stealing cars, they're using tools that are kind of bought on Amazon. Like if I wanted to get into this, I could pretty much set myself up, for maybe a couple $100s off of Amazon, and Prime membership. Next day, I'm off to the races. What do what are your thoughts on the idea of maybe having to limit these tools? Like we're talking, tablets or electronic devices that can mirror key fob signals, so that people can just walk in, start the car, hop in, take off. There's talk about encoding that or limiting these devices only to like a licensed mechanic. What are your thoughts on that? Is that something that the police chiefs would endorse or would want to see happen, just to get another hurdle to get these organizations able to do what they're doing?
Yeah, it's a combination of, probably 3 or 4 years ago, those devices cost a few $1,000s and they were very limited. Now you can probably get them for a couple or a few $100s and they're available everywhere. So it's complicated in that we've asked the auto manufacturers to come up with better ways of protecting the vehicles. I mean, I've always said probably for a few years now, it's harder for me to get in or break into your laptop or your iPhone than it is to steal your car. So there should be technology available. The auto theft or the auto manufacturers would argue we could invest millions and millions of dollars and someone will defeat that anyway. I think there's sort of a balance there. The cynical side of a 42-year veteran police officer might say every stolen car is also another sold car. There's got to be some onus on the manufacturers to help as much as they can. Then there are different devices that we can put, tracking devices, because these people who are stealing cars can turn off or break a variety of GPS locators that are in the vehicles. There are some different systems. Tag is just one name where they put 7 or 8 devices in a car so that they're difficult or almost impossible to find. That would help us recover more, and that's a bit of a deterrent. But there's still, that overall cost and how can we sort of target hardened vehicles? Often they're left in driveways, they're not put in garages. There's a lot of simple things people can do as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, certainly we do charge people with having devices that are specific to stealing vehicles when we catch them in stolen vehicles. But again, the deterrent for that, they've got that device,
It,
steal a car in 20 seconds, it's worth the risk.
it is, I'm surprised to hear that it is illegal to have, these devices in the car if you're not a mechanic. Like how does that exactly
Yeah,
work?
I'd have to check the technicality, but I know that it's similar to, off for many, many years, we've charged people with break and enter into a house and with possession of break and enter tools. And I
Okay.
believe there's a section that's similar to that now,
Okay. I see.
specific to auto theft, but that's only if you find that tool and in a situation where it's, apt to have been used that way.
Well, I guess, yeah, driving around at 3 o'clock in the morning with the,
Yeah.
the fob device is a little suspicious to say the least.
Yeah.
And
And
I
it's
believe,
evidence. I mean, it's all good evidence
right.
against the person that,
Well,
it's more.
I believe that's how coming kind of bringing this conversation full circle. That's how the police officers in question caught the two gentlemen that you made the statement about. They identified that they were having suspicious equipment with them, and that kind of led that tipped off the officers to something's not right here, if I'm
Right.
not mistaken. Very interesting. The last point that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this to you is that we're seeing police budgets constantly rise in Ontario. As far as correct me if I'm wrong. I always love being wrong, but we've not seen a jurisdiction where police budget has gone down in recent years. Uh, Halton got $1 million more than requests in the latest budget, and totaling a 13.8% increase from last year. Um, I'm wondering what amount of this increase is it going to have an impact on an operation like this? This is something that I think is on the forefront. The safety of people's cars and homes right in the forefront in Halton, Peel, definitely Toronto. How is this increase going to be put towards keeping people's property and livelihood safe?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the answer is only a small portion of that 13.8% goes towards additional staff or sometimes equipment. But that I think we're only hiring an additional 26 police officers for all of those millions of dollars. Most of that increase, and I think it was over 10% of that increase, is the compound impact of increased wage negotiations over about a 3-year period.
Hmm.
So it's sort of what happened was back 3 years ago, all the police services say they budgeted a 2.5% increase for salary increases. And then the police associations and the boards or arbitrators awarded 3.5. So you're 1% behind. And then that happened for a couple of years. And there's every time salary increases, there's other increases to the cost of pension plans and benefit costs are going up. So there was only that extra million that the Halton Region Council approved at the end was purely, I would say, for an additional 10 officers in addition to the 16 or so that we're already asking for. But most of the about 90% of a police budget is salary, benefits, and pensions, and then you buy police cars and build facilities, and so there's really just a small amount of that 13.8
Mhm.
to hire additional staff. And if you hired 26 additional police officers and spread them around a region the size of Halton and across 24 hours, 7 days a week, it's barely keeping up or not quite keeping up with the rate of growth in the region of Halton, which we have to, as our populations grow. I don't know if you're familiar with the town of Milton. Uh,
Uh, yes.
Now it's 130,000. It's going to be 300,000 in the next 10 or 15 years. So, there's got to be growth in budgets proportionately to a degree with population
Mhm.
and complexities. So, yeah, it's a good question. Most of those large increases that you've seen in police budgets, I mean, I think in Peel, it was exceptional this year where they received funding, I think, for 300 additional officers because of all the things they're dealing with in
Mhm.
Mississauga and Brampton. But most of those police budget increases are keeping up with salaries and benefits it's interesting. There's the sunshine list, $100,000. It was $100,000, I think, 25 years ago.
Well,
Um,
yeah, it should be something that should be kept up with inflation. I think
it
it,
probably should be around 170 or 180,000
right.
now, but every police constable is in that sunshine list. But it's also at a time where it's becoming increasingly difficult to attract people into policing. We have less applicants now than we used to at a time when we need more officers. So yeah,
That
you definitely have to be competitive on the salary and compensation.
I I would love to have this. You've opened up a whole new episode to me on
You're welcome.
that, but I am gonna give you a break on that,
No problem.
and maybe I'll invite you back for another episode. And we can discuss police budgeting, because it is something that I honestly I do find fascinating. It's a necessary thing, but
Yeah.
I from somebody on the outside, I find that there's a bit of an opaqueness in terms of how these tax dollars are spent, and it's not something of like, oh, it's a wasted. I can't say it's a wasted line item,
Yeah.
but I'm also like, but what are we getting for it? So that, and I think our listeners would love to know how is this necessary service being funded properly and being used effectively to keep us safe. But that's not what this episode's about. So I'm going to give you a break on that one. But Chief Tanner, I'm not going to keep any more of your time, but I am just going to give you the last word on this issue. Um, there'll be people listening not just in Halton but across the 905 who are going to be wondering, how do I make sure that my cars, my property, my family is safe when I am out and about? Um, what would you like to say to them on this issue?
Yeah, we 3 years ago we had 1,500 cars stolen. We were down to 1,200 last year. We've had 182 stolen in the first 10 weeks of this year. We're down about 40%, but it's still an epidemic. We're having houses broken into. We're having carjackings on the street from time to time. Not as often as some of our neighboring jurisdictions, but extremely concerning for our citizens. There's a number of things you can do. A lot of vehicles are stolen out of driveways or when parked at malls or hotels. Um, a simple deterrent is still the club or something on a wheel. I put that in my police car every time I leave the vehicle. There are immobilizers, which are a bit more expensive, which would prevent somebody from stealing the car, even if they change the fob. There are different tracking devices. As I said, put vehicles in the driveway in the garage if you can, instead of the driveway. Most vehicles are found by these criminals driving around and locating them, or they have other younger kids even doing that and saying, there's a Range Rover here or a Dodge Ram pickup truck there. So there's a number of simple things we can do. Cameras are great. We solve a lot of crimes now through neighbors, either the victim's cameras or neighbors' cameras, all sorts of different crimes, not just auto theft. So honestly, I wish every house in Halton had doorbell cameras and outside video. It would help us solve so many things. Not that we have access to all the time, but when something happens and people choose to share it with us, it's not a privacy thing. It really helps us solve a lot of very serious crimes, including a couple of murders in the last couple of years that were solved by neighborhood cameras. So anything you can do to target harden your residents or your business against criminals, I'd certainly encourage.
Well, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Chief Tanner from Halton Police, for coming on the podcast today. Important topic. Not sure if it's going away anytime soon, but we're very thankful for the work that you and your department and quite frankly all the departments across the region do on this. So thank you very much for your time and your service today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.
I'm Andrea Askowitz.
And I'm Allison Langer. And we are the hosts of Writing Class Radio, a podcast, but we are so much more. We have writing classes. So if you are looking for live online classes where you can join a community, write to a prompt, get feedback, and get better, check out all our classes at writingclassradio.com.
And listen to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts and at writingclassradio.com.
Are your poor communication skills holding you back from being the leader you know you can be? The Master Communicator is a podcast that can help you improve your communication skills in just a few minutes a week. I'm David Tyler, a broadcaster and communication coach, and each week I deliver bite-sized masterclasses for busy leaders like you. Each episode is packed with practical techniques and strategies to help you navigate challenging conversations, delivering impactful messages, and inspire your team. Whether you're looking to enhance your executive presence, build a culture of trust, or simply lead with more confidence, the Master Communicator is your go-to resource. Subscribe now and start your journey to becoming the leader you were meant to be. Transform your communication skills, one episode at a time.